Hello, all. Welcome to another episode of DirectShift Stories. And today we are joined by a special guest um, where we speak on the chronicles of indigenous healers. We speak about the journey of healing and empowerment. And if you're watching this live, let me know in the comment section from which city you're watching in, or let us know what would you love to hear, or probably you can ask the questions for our special guest. So on this episode, we are joined by Rosaana, who is a psychotherapist, clinician, manager, and who is into social justice, working as a spiritual leader. Um, in fact, she worked in many nonprofits. In fact, the kind of skill set she has is in nonprofit organizations, in management, um, in trauma therapy, and also as a student counseling, or probably as part of crisis intervention and case management. We can, um, welcome Rosaana Conforme Campuzana onto our show. It's an honor. Thank you for accepting our invite to be part of Directive Stories. Could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Rosaana Conforme Campuzano. I think Raj, you mentioned a couple of things that I've done, but just to give you a sense of who I am. I was born in Ecuador, and I came to the States when I was 3. I'm an indigenous immigrant, woman of color, and that's how we identify. I grew up in New York City, in Brooklyn, and I did all my studies here. And also, my work life has been here. So I've been living here for more than 30 plus years. And so it's a pleasure to be here, Raj, and thank you for inviting me, and for just bringing me in and being able to voice sort of my story and my journey through all my paths, whether that be the educational path, but also the professional one.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Rosanna, for a quick short intro as to who you are. So good to know that you've been in US for almost, I guess, maybe close to 35 or
Mhm.
40 years, but since 3, this is awesome. So you would know everything from mental health space, or probably what would a clinician require, right? Somebody who worked on therapeutic approaches, probably somebody who worked on behavioral therapy. So let's dive in. Let's kickstart our show um, with another set of questions. Like, in case if there is out there, if there is any other profession which you had to choose apart from helping people right now, what profession would you choose, Rosanna?
So just to make sure I understood your question, Raj. So if I didn't choose this profession, what other profession I would have chosen?
That's right.
That's an interesting question because when I knew I wanted to be a psychotherapist since I was 7 years old. And one of the things that I thought of at the moment was wanting to help people, and that's sort of what I wanted. On the flip side, the other part of me wanted to be an actress. When I was much younger, I used to create these monologues and play them out at home, and my parents thought I was talking to myself half the time. But really, I was just creating the monologues and doing these amazing stories. Which, by the way, I don't know what happened to them, but I was creating these amazing stories, and I would have wanted to be an actress. Part of the reason why I wanted to be an actress at the time was there was so much going on with me. As I mentioned to you earlier, I was raised in Brooklyn, and in the neighborhood that we were raised in, there was so much poverty, so much community violence that was happening. We were immigrants in this country. There was a lot of access to not having access to services. And so one of the things I was creating in some of these stories and monologues was really about sort of getting help, right? And being able to access some of the services that we were not being given the opportunity to have. And so, what I wanted to do with these stories is change the narrative, and create sort of these spaces where I would find some kind of assistance and help at that moment. So, that is really the deepest thing I can think about at 7 years old that I was thinking. But that was definitely what I was thinking in terms of just being a therapist, but also being an actress to change some of these, creating these monologues to be able to change the stories and the narratives of people, and even just my community, my family.
Wow, that's awesome. So
Mhm.
that's present right from childhood days, trying to create these monologues or create an impactful, um, creating more awareness in the community. Like, how did the journey move into creating awareness on domestic violence?
Yes, absolutely. So, just to give you a sense of why I chose to be in the field that I am now, I started in my profession more than 21 years ago. And at the
Wow,
time, I decided to enter this field because of my own personal experiences of family, sexual, and community violence, trauma, poverty, racism, sexism, colorism, and all the different forms of oppression one faces as an immigrant person of color in this country. I was determined to make a difference and make an impact in my world, in the women's movement, in the child abuse movement, particularly in the Latinx community. I wanted to help families. Um, Actually, 21 years ago, I wanted to save families, as I would have wanted my family to be saved. Obviously, I learned very early, quickly, that my role was not to save anyone, but rather to support their journey, help them explore their options, connect them to resources, help them discover their own inner power, and just basically be there as part of their journey, right? Today, what keeps me in the field is still the same issues. I also want to continue to address the mental health divide and the health divides that exist in immigrant Black, Indigenous communities of color. Issues like these were even more exacerbated during COVID. So I want to, part of why I continue to stay and what keeps me very passionate about it is really to help close these divides and gaps that I see, not only in the people that I work with, but also in research.
wow, okay, awesome. So, in fact, all the obstacles or challenges which you have faced had paved a better way for you, is what I should say. So, definitely with the kind of certification, or could you speak about the licensure exam? Like, because normally any therapist or licensed clinical social worker whom I speak to or chat, they say they had given multiple attempts to clear their exam. So I just wanted to know, based upon you, I could see that you were a tough woman. So how long did it take for you to clear your licensure exam?
Right. Well, that's a journey too in and of itself, right? Because I think when you do the licensing exam, it's never the same. And no matter how you study, you don't know what you're studying for. It's such an exam that it's not like you have 100 questions and all of a sudden you study those 100 questions and you're there. It's definitely a lot. For me, particularly, I had been in the field for such a long time before I took the licensure exam, so it I had to change my way of thinking, because I'm also very culturally adaptive to everything that I do, and also very culturally, sort of aware, especially when I talk to my clients. Um, the exam is not that way. It's very westernized, very you can't analyze anything. It's just whatever is there. So I had to learn that process very differently, and they taught us that when I went to one of the classes. So it took me a little bit before I even was confident enough to take the exam. I had heard of folks as well take it several times and not pass, because of the way the exam is structured, and because it's honestly not sort of the real life thing that happens when you see some of these questions. And so you really have to just back off and just look at what the question is in front of you. So it took me a little bit. I did pass the exam, and it was a success for me at the moment because it's a 4 hour exam that's also very tedious. 4 hours, your brain is really done and tired by that time. 4 hours come up later, and to see sort of a passing grade or P right next to your name is an amazing feeling to have. But it is a process. It's not something that is simple. It's something that for any person who's trying to get a license, that they should study, make the time to do it, make the time commitment to do it. Keep it in mind that there is no sort of guide that this is the way the exam is going to be. You can only get sort of experiences of past exams that you have, and you can look at them, and they'll give it to you depending if you go to different, especially the National Association of Social Workers have a lot of um, like workshops regarding LMSWs and LCSWs that they can give you sort of tips around what they possibly come out in the exam or not. So I would also say that you should take that so that you are able to sort of have some idea of what the exam could be about, and also they can practice with you some sort of logistical things that can happen, as well as some textual things. They also give you, if you do register for these classes, they also give you like a workbook that shows exam questions, and it helps you with some of the exercises, and continues to do that. I've signed up for many different things, not just the NSAW workshop. I also signed up for like different platforms where I can do practice exams, so that I can be better prepared. But it is really, it's
Okay.
not an easy exam. Definitely it isn't.
Yeah, I see that you've also worked with different schools of social work, helping other students take up the certification or graduate with the kind of social work which they are in. Like, could you speak about the youth programs or the kind of women's health initiatives you have taken up? I was just going through the same when I went through your bio, probably beat the Saki for South Asian women. So, could you speak about the kind of initiatives which you have taken, Rosanna?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, definitely, I've been in different organizations and mostly in nonprofit organizations. My first job was in Safe Horizon, where I did a lot of work within the court system. I was working with families, I wasn't necessarily just working with women, but definitely at that time, I was working with women, men, and children who were survivors of child sexual abuse, and also for survivors of domestic violence. And so I was pretty much in the court system. So I did a lot of work in advocacy work within the court system, and also within um, the court, so the criminal and the family court system, and obviously with different other systems itself. So we did I did a lot of work with them at the time. At the time, I was also in Safe Horizon. I was a co-facilitator in the Batters program, which was a mandated program that provided workshops and services to men um, who were mandated, uh, who were considered perpetrators of through the court, perpetrators of domestic violence. So I would facilitate a lot of groups there. From there, I went over to Seki for South Asian women. I was a director of services at the time, and I was providing sort of oversight of the case management and the financial empowerment program that they had there. And that was a learning
Okay.
for me too at the time as well, because it was a different community than my own, and definitely getting to learn sort of the culture and understanding the culture, and definitely being an ally versus coming in as I know it all because I'm a director now, but definitely being an ally to this particular community was an important process and an important learning for me in my own field. Also, an important learning of humility as well, because I think, again, once you have a degree, you think you can go out and save the world. And honestly, the world is very, it's hard and different for many communities. And in particular, when I was working in Seki, that was one of the things that I recognized and realized, and worked with a lot of my teams to be able to understand what the community needed that was different than the Latinx community. So I did a lot of work with them around that, but definitely using my staff, especially because I didn't know the language many times, but also using my staff as well to make sure that we were doing what women, what they wanted, what they needed. So hearing their voices was a particular thing. I think that was the very first time in that particular organization when I started understanding that hearing survivor voices was so important.
Yeah, and this is a tricky question which I wanted to ask Rosanna. With the kind of different personalities you had worked, um, probably we could also highlight on the diversity and inclusion factor which we mentioned in previous calls. So, what's your take on the kind of documentation which any therapist had to go through?
Hmm.
Because normally in the mental health space, if somebody is going through as a person who had worked in the nonprofit segment, you know that there is a huge documentation which needs to be done.
Yeah.
What's your
Mhm.
take on that? How do we solve that problem?
Yeah.
Like,
I
do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think one of the things I've been trying to do within my research in my doctoral studies, and looking at some of the gaps in research and understanding how to culturally adapt an intervention, for example, or how to be culturally mindful and make sure that there's cultural relevancy around sort of the work that we do. We have to all keep in mind, no matter what communities we work in, is that to be inclusive, we also not only have to provide someone with the language, because I do feel that once you put an interpreter, you lose a connection, and there's not always a clean interpretation from one language to English in the way that we want it to be. So that I know as experience, that doesn't really happen in the clean way that we want it. Aside from the fact that you lose connection with clients at the same time, so definitely being able to provide clients with the ability of having someone who is able to speak in their language and that they can relate to. Second is to translate in some of these forms and documentations that you have, so that clients can understand what they're first looking at, signing, and even if they don't understand or know how to read, even being able to provide that access to being able to include that as part of your work, if in fact you have someone in front of you who doesn't know the language, but definitely being able to translate in the language of the population that you're working with. Third of all is, many of our practices here in the U.S. is very westernized,
Yeah.
very Americanized, and one of the things that I have been doing, and even just looking at within my doctoral studies, is how do you become more inclusive? And one of the many things that they've suggested and I have done is done focus groups with clients and talk about what they want to have, some of the things that they want to have included in their sessions. What they, if we're trying to change or adapt an intervention, we want to be able to ask what kind of things they think that we should highlight in our community, so that we can understand and do sort of a holistic approach to being able to provide services to clients without creating sort of this divide. Because I do feel that we've been imposing to our clients these westernized interventions and approaches, and not really taking the time to look at or even just integrate some of the cultural practices or traditional practices that they have in these interventions. So really looking at that and making sure that we're hearing them, making sure like what their coping mechanisms are, that we can include that, instead of us trying to say, hey, breathe, that this works, and what have they been doing? And they have been doing it more than we have. So what can we include when we're like adapting interventions, for example? So things like that, I feel like, is you still have to hear survivors, and that has not been the practice within the U.S. when it comes to like really looking at or providing services to clients. The assumption has always been that there's an intervention and we put it in to everyone in a very general way, and it doesn't work. It hasn't worked, right? And so I think at this point we have to be much more mindful and make sure that we're making connections with our community, not in the way that we're seeing it as experts, right? But more that they're already experts to what they have done, and they have practices that will be helpful and much more powerful than the ones that we can give them.
Yeah. And could we talk about the indigenous healer? So how does one um, become a indigenous healer, or what's our take on sharing the stories of healing and empowerment? Because not only from family perspective, the trauma or sexual violence or kind of abuse which is there, there's so many things uh, due to the pandemic parenting, or be it on personal lives or on the relationship. We're all going through lots of changes.
Mm-hmm.
Even so, what's your take on how should um, one go ahead probably with their journey of life?
Yeah. So just to make sure I understand your question, so you want to, I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yeah. So the question is like, what should one do to be part of this journey of being an indigenous healer? Or
Mm-hmm.
probably what should, as you mentioned, that therapy is not just breathe in and breathe out. It's not about being mindful about the current situation. It's more of overall therapy. So how can one
Yeah.
become a indigenous healer? Probably I can put it like, what should one do to have a similar career like yours?
Hmm. Sure. So for me, and I can only speak for myself at this moment, right? One of the things that happened, I would say maybe 20 years ago, was more than that, was a denial of my own identity, of who I was. Um,
Okay.
Partly because of the way that growing up in the US, you're not accepted as often if you're talking about being indigenous, right? You're not accepted in that way. You're already a person of color just by looking at me. Like this is the by just staring, knowing and just looking at me, you know that I'm not white. And so there's a lot of rejection that goes alongside that. So I spent that 3 years in school and definitely around the environment that I grew up in. And by the time I hit, I would say mid 20s, um, I started recognizing sort of my indigenous part of myself. And it took a lot to really understand what that meant for me. And it has been a work in progress that at this point of my life, I'm able to say, um, proudly say that I am an indigenous woman. Um, what that comes along with is understanding your culture and definitely understanding what it means, the traditions that it holds, what kind of things they've done, what practices they use, what healing practices they use, and really help in understanding that. So for me, I had to learn how to understand that. It wasn't something just reading a book. It was really understanding sort of the nature of my culture and the way and the approaches they have done to be able to heal centuries of healing, right? Because it wasn't just um, today. It's been hundreds and decades of healing of different sorts, especially when we talk about colonialism, and sort of just how in particularly in my country, how many of my people were killed, right? And so I think there's a lot of trauma around that, and so really understanding how some of the healing practices came into play. So for me, it was just learning. It was a lot of learning. It was a lot of understanding my culture. It was a lot of asking, a lot of understanding my own ancestors and sort of the practices that they did. It was understanding sort of the medicine that they've used that is not, but again, not westernized in that way. Um, Understanding sort of like what healing circles are, because there's a lot of use of healing circles in the indigenous cult, in the indigenous background that I have. Storytelling is a big thing as well. That now, if you I don't know if you ever seen this, Raj, but one of the things that has come about in the U.S. is about sort of this digital storytelling sort of aspect of healing, in which you talk about your stories in different ways when it comes to videos and using videos and like this technology and like voice and music and all and images, so that you can create sort of a narrative. And so, to be quite honest, when you look at some of these practices, you realize these practices are practices that my ancestors have been doing years ago. It just wasn't named that way. And so,
Oh, probably we can speak it as like the current artificial intelligence, or probably the virtual reality. I saw patients in therapy sessions with the VR glasses,
mhm,
trying to visualize different environment when they're going through therapy, or probably when they are under some kind of a treatment, if they had to sit for 6 to 8 hours.
mhm.
So I guess definitely what you shared adds value to what ancestors had done in the past and with what the current technology is doing.
Yeah. And I want to empower, I want to take, definitely empower that part of myself. And for those who are if I'm serving someone who's an indigenous person, I want to empower the fact that, yes, these indigenous practices that have been around for so many years have become westernized in so many ways. And so it's like now they have a name. But you know what? My ancestors has been doing it for 100 years ago. And so
Yeah,
I want to make sure that I own that not only I own that, but I also respect to the person that's in front of me, that this is what's been happening even before it became a name that's now like, very expensive to even access, right? And so I think
yeah,
that for me, that's important to understand and to recognize these practices. And again, using medicine, using plants, all this stuff that, again, like I would ignore before, and that I would just, part of myself because of the way that I grew up and I was told to be shamed. I was shamed about it. And so I think that was creating sort of that power within myself, but also now being able to help those to explore and identify in the best way that they can, and also being able to find their own practices. I want that what that means to them. Not everybody is going to do meditation and breathing, right? That's not maybe the way they do it. They may do a visualization, like you just mentioned, right? But their visualization is different. Metaphysics works have talked about visualization in so
that
many
is
ways,
true.
and that has gone for many years. It's not something that just came up new, but they name it differently. So how do we really keep on? And it goes back into when we think about these different practices that we use when it comes to outside of westernized practices. How do we take on and bring the power back to the practices that we have done in our communities, and especially for the clients that we work with? How do we take in their voices and make sure that we honor their own practices without imposing others that are very similar to what they've been doing? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's this like let's go through like a fireside chat, probably with series of questions. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rosaana. So again, I'll flash the question on the screen. What is this one thing you wish you had known before you began your career, based upon your personal experience? What do you wish? Like, uh, do you wish you were born in America, or do you wish probably you had more resources, or
Yeah.
at the beginning of your career, what is that one thing which you wish you had known?
I mean, definitely all of that. But I think also one of the things that I would have wanted to know was that I would find myself in this journey. Um, Many times you enter the helping profession with a huge commitment in helping others, but no one really tells you that you're going to find yourself in the way, and that doing so, that the path sometimes is painful, but it's also very empowering. And for me, um, I would have wanted to know that. I would have wanted to know that in coming into this career and helping others, that I was going to find myself, but also that it was going to be painful, and then out of the pain was going to come a much more powerful person, and that's not what we're told. So I would have really wanted to know that before I started my
Yeah,
career.
yeah. Finding true self comes with lots of experiences and other people sharing their
Hmm.
vulnerabilities. And being vulnerable is again
Yeah.
takes lots of courage. So, in case if you give to an advice to somebody out there, probably a younger Rosaana, or probably another person out there who trying to pursue their journey on into the field of social work, what would you give your advice to somebody who is pursuing a career similar to yours?
Hmm. I would say be open to the journey. Be open to both teaching and learning. Be curious and empathic about people and their struggles. Um, and if you're coming into this field, make sure you create allies. We cannot do this work alone. Um, as movement shakers, we want to influence and change systems. So we need people who understand and are passionate about how the intersect of different social justice issues impact marginalized communities. And so you want to be able to explain your purpose. Also, just understand that not everyone is in the same place or as woke as you are. And so you have to remember to take the time to help others see your vision, the purpose of social change, and the importance of righting the wrongs. And so having sort of that just humanity with others, and making sure that you educate and you also create awareness before you expect them to just jump into your bus with you.
That's true. That's awesome. In fact, most of us look for happiness online, be it in our comments or likes and shares. The digital wellness is something, again, everybody's getting more addicted due to the digital literacy during the last 1 year. Most of us spend enough number of hours on the screen,
Hmm.
and we are so addicted to the kind of engagement, but not many people are social on the social media platform. Finding allies is something definitely important. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rosaana. So, did that also lead your journey to being an instructor? Because you mentioned keep learning, keep
Yeah.
teaching. So, how did you end up being part of Columbia School of Social
Yeah.
Work? Like,
Yes. So one of the things that happened, and I think I always feel like when things come into your path, it was because it was meant to come at the time it was meant to come. I think
that's
years ago
right.
I tried to come into doing when I first graduated with my MSW. I wanted to teach, and it just didn't seem the time. No matter how much I tried, it just didn't come to me. Even though I applied to different positions, and this one came very magically to me 2 years ago. And when a friend of mine's, two colleagues actually, two colleagues of mine who are very close friends now, and who I work with, and definitely are mentors to me, inviting me to come to teach in Columbia University. And at first I was like, I can't do this. This is not part of what I do. But a lot of the classes that we were doing was definitely social work classes. And I had already been and a field instructor to social work students. And so I've been doing that since I would say 11 years now for as a field instructor. And so
Wow.
one of the things that I thought about at the time is like, well, what is it that I can't teach that I haven't already taught my field and my students, the students that I supervise? So that gave me a lot of confidence to go and do that. So I started working as a part-time um, with
Okay. That's
Columbia University.
But how would the work be as a field instructor? Because you spend over a decade. Definitely, unless you're passionate about the field work, as a field instructor, you wouldn't be doing it day in and day out. So many people who take up the career, they feel bored, or there's this burnout after 3 to 4 years. They lose that spark, or they
Yeah,
lose their passion.
yeah,
What
no, no.
kept you? What kept you moving
I,
forward?
I definitely understand that aspect because when I entered my doctoral program, I was at that point. I was like, well, I've done it all almost, right? And so what do I
Yeah.
do now? And what I tried to do before I started my doctoral programs was really engage in different areas of social work, whether that be like, again, policy work, community organizing, organizational leadership. And then I tried higher education, right? Because that's sort of where it was leading me to. I had tried these different areas. Um, and lastly, when I decided to do the doctoral program, I was like, well, this is my next step because I need to start doing something different. And I also want to be an influential person, right? Like I want to be able to influence these different parts. One of the things that was really important for me to see in my doctoral programs was the gap in research that existed within my own communities. And that really got me to the point of being very passionate, of really wanting to make sure that we're going to be heard, that our voices were being heard, that somehow I'm going to make this happen, right? And I still believe and am very passionate and dedicated and committed to doing this, is wanting to make sure that my community is part of that, that the research is not going to be based upon a 1% of a Latinx a person or in a particular research, and then you overgeneralize about how we can implement something to my community when only 1% have been present. And so, how to engage my community around research? Why is it important? Making sure they understand it, making sure they know the logistics around it. I want to be part of that movement and that change within the research field. And just to go back into what you talked about or asked a little bit about the field instruction, one of the things that keeps me passionate about being able to teach MSW students is because it goes back into some of the myths about our profession, right? One of the things that many students come with is that social workers only do counseling, right? In clinical and direct service practice work. And as I mentioned right now, I think we're influential everywhere. We're influential in policy work. We're influential in higher education, in community organizing, in organizational leadership, in management work. And so one of the things that I strongly encourage my social work interns to critically think about is the intersect of all these areas of concentration, and to look how they all influence each other and impact an individual client. So I want to shift the mindset that we do not only do clinical work, or that if you decide to go into a track of community organizing, that somehow there's no connection to direct practice. So making sure for them to understand sort of the intersect and how they influence each other is something that I try to really teach my students, and I want them to do that because I know I wasn't actually taught that. And I know that I practice all this, and I've been lucky and fortunate enough to be able to touch in different areas and work in different areas of social work, that now I know the importance and the power it has to understand and engage these different places in order to make social change.
Yeah, as a strong research professional, with the kind of resources which had helped you, is it always how does the research go? Like, are there any resources apart from normally the one uh, resource which I know is always Google? First thing is I always Google. So as a research professional, what are the resources which had helped you? How do you handle your students of master social work? How do you help them cope up with the
I
kind
mean,
of research?
definitely Google is a very helpful professor, but it's not all. I think one of the things that being a student still in the PhD program, having access to the library is important for me because I'm able to find an array of things.
Oh, okay.
And I think that's one of the things that has been super helpful for me. But also, even when I don't have um, the library doesn't have a specific article or a specific resource, I try to, as much as I can, to purchase, if I can, some of the resources that are available. The other thing that I've done on my own is really connect and reach out to some of the authors to talk a little bit about their work and to understand their process. Um, this I wouldn't be the first researcher doing things on my own, so why would I have to reinvent the wheel, right? So it's just I
That's
do
right.
want to speak to other researchers and see their journey. What I'm trying to connect to is also researchers who are researchers of color, to see what they're doing as well, because I do want to make sure that I use them as a resource to see where they're at in their journey, but also to create a community, because I feel like we're all, especially in I have to say, in the PhD, once you reach a PhD, it's like there's a lot of um, doing things
Stigma.
on your own, maybe,
Yeah.
and I don't want to do that. I don't think
Um,
at this point
eh,
when we reach this with this port time, or I guess this level of studies and sort of expertise, we want to create these experts as opposed to doing things on our own because we just want to do it in that way. What's for me, it's just like I feel the power in unity and making sure that when we're talking about, even for myself, when we're talking about a social justice issue we want to address in research, then how do we do that in a way that it's not just one researcher, two researchers are talking about it, but you have a whole bunch of researchers, because it's going to create power. And so for me, that's important for me to at least have contact with different people who have done this in the past, especially people who look like me.
yeah, awesome. I had a aha moment. So the core element of being a social worker is first be social. So
Yeah.
look for partnerships, collaboration. Probably as a research professional also, I guess we are overprotective, or we are trying to secure the kind of research which we do, doing all by ourselves. But I guess a conversation will definitely help. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Rosanna, for sharing. I could visualize, or I could predict, confirm conversations or Campusana conversations as a show, like a coffee show with, or coffee with Rosanna Confirm, or probably coffee with
That's
Campusana. Probably,
awesome.
I could predict something like that. The way you put it across, this is awesome. So, with respect to education, again, as are you still part of this PhD research with Fordham University, or
Yes.
is
So
it?
So yes, I will let you know a little bit of my journey. So I started 3 years ago, doing entering school, did coursework, and I don't know if you how much you know about the PhDs within the United States, or at least with Fordham University. One of the things that you have to do first is do coursework. After coursework, you do comprehensive exams, and then after the comprehensive
Yeah.
exams, you go into dissertation. So I finished coursework, and so I'm now in the phase of comprehensive exams. And so in the midst of it, right now, I'm doing two research. I'm a research assistant in two projects with two different professors. So that has completely helped me to understand a lot of how research is being done, but also just to the classes, right? I think it's now the sort of what I learned in the classes I'm able to implement, and I'm translating that into a lot of things when it comes to my current job. So that's where I'm at. I'm in the learning process. I'm still learning. I can't even say I'm an expert to it because I think it takes years to do that. But definitely in the moment of absorbing and learning and really having these aha moments and these moments of like, that's the way I can do it and that's how I can do it different. This is how I can amend that and this is how I'm going to create that. So having the sort of the opportunity to be able to create something new, but also following obviously sort of the protocols when it comes to research, but also to put in your culture and your background and your traditions in it, and make sure that those folks that have been silenced or have been invisible thus far in research is present, is so it's so great for me to see that, and so great for me to be able to be part of that, and I want to continue to do that.
Awesome. So, diving down further, now I know that you are your own influential person, because the moment we look at ourselves in the mirror every day, when we look at our own eyes, or probably we look at our mirror, we are our own most influential person. But who are the three people who had been influential to you during this journey of being
Yeah.
creating more awareness, be it part of domestic violence, or trying to be who you are right now? Who are the most influential persons?
At the moment, or just like
Yes.
in the way.
At the moment, because we're all living our lives in
Yeah.
boxes, probably at the moment would be great.
Yeah. So I do have three people right now that have been influential in this journey, and when it comes to especially the PhD program, is my mother, my father, and my spiritual mentor. And all three of them have different reasons why. My mother, she this is one of the strongest, well, humans I know. Um, she came as an immigrant to this country, started working, brought my dad, and then later my brother and I to the United States. I can't even imagine how scary that must have been for her to leave her family and everything she knew to come here and start a new life. On top of that, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, in a different culture than hers. Um, so yeah, I mean that was just scary. I can't even imagine what that felt like for her. At the same time, I cannot help to recognize that this is one of the bravest things she's done, which has influenced me to look at fear in my eyes, like look at fear really in the eyes, and just not be afraid, and just take the risk. So that was one of the things that I feel like, one of the many things that I've learned from my mother, and to try to hone into um, my own work that I do for myself, and see what they've done, because these are folks. My mom and dad, they're folks who had no education, who didn't even strive for it. They were just working. They were one of 10 children in their family, and they had to take care of the younger ones. All of this was part of their reality, and here they are. They moved into the state and created this. This created me, like who I've become. And so definitely they have been very influential. My dad is a go-getter. He's like, nothing's gonna stop me. I'm just gonna go. I'm looking at that one thing over there that's miles away, and I'm gonna make it. That man has been knocked down several times, but he still made it that to that same path where he said he had looked at, and that's where I'm going. And that's sort of the same way I am.
Awesome.
That knocked me down, and definitely I've kept going. And definitely my spiritual mentor. I'm a spiritual person, so he has helped me ground myself. He has helped me better understand sort of my own connection to the universe and to God. And that helps a lot in my own faith and for me to go forward when things are not easy. And they're not easy, especially for someone who looks like myself.
Awesome. That's good. I wish somebody out there. Now, again, the three most influential people had definitely paved like the path, whatever the path. In fact, they didn't go through any licensure exams or tough research, which you had gone through, but their life and journey had paved their paths. So again, this is probably we will this would be the last question for the day. But if somebody had or if you had to spend 100 million,
Yeah.
probably be it in therapy or counseling, what is that one thing which you would work on? How would you spend over 100 million as
If I
part
was
of a strong research personal? How, if somebody had, or if you had 100 million, how would you spend it?
right. I mean, one of the things that I've been looking at during this time of COVID, has been on the medical and mental health issues that many people have gone through. Um, COVID impacted our communities a lot, and one of the things that, just to share with you, my uncle passed away in the first wave of COVID, back in March, and then I had a
Oh,
lot of
sorry to you.
lot of
Sorry.
family members. Thank you. A lot of family members and friends who passed away right after. Um, January this year, a family member, and also another aunt passed away because of COVID. Um, so for me, it is so important to understand sort of the health divide that exists right in our communities, and how do we make, for example, health insurance or healthcare available for people who are marginalized, basically. One of the things within COVID is that you saw a lot of increments of telehealth services that were being offered. Um, During
That's right.
2020, I myself had to reach out to many doctors due to like several health conditions. And I feel like we all had health conditions in 2020 because we were just all exasperated and anxious, and everything was happening so quickly. So I was able to connect and speak with my doctors via, the video platform that they offer. And while I think this is such a valuable resource, I recognize that not everyone has access to internet or communication technology. And the internet, just like with you and me right now, like we're enabled us to talk together, and it's enabled us to connect. It enables us to like sort of continue our lives despite the pandemic, right? Yet this isn't
Yeah.
the reality for everyone. Digitalization is not happening equally all over the world, and COVID-19 has widened the digital divide that already existed in Latinx immigrant communities. This divide persists because even though there's so many like mass marketing of electronic devices, with internet
Yeah.
it's so expensive. Like, who can afford, if you don't have the economics means to do that, who can afford to buy one? And I think one of the things that, aside from that, I think one of the other things that creates sort of this digital divide is the lack of knowledge. Like, some of these like media, like you send me this link to come into StreamYard. I've never seen it, and I was like, well, how do I do this, right? And you somehow have to be computer savvy to try to go into it. But someone who doesn't have that ability is not going to be able to come and connect to you in that way. And even with those that when we were trying to connect with clients through a telehealth platform, there were many clients who didn't understand the language around it because they were all in English. And so for me,
That
that's
is true.
also the lack of divide that happens. So if I had $100 million to spend on health tech, I would invest it in some form of electronic device with internet access that patients can be given so that they can connect, especially those with chronic conditions, so that they can communicate with their doctors. So if each patient would be able to get some form of something, I don't know, a beeper looking something that they can have access to the doctors right away, because they may not have the means, they may not have Wi-Fi, they may not have a technology that connects accurately to or effectively to the doctors, would be helpful. So for example, an elderly patient recovering at home for in a post-acute care can receive a video consultation without having to physically go into the office and not be financially impacted by travel costs. So that's what I would do with the $1 million.
Awesome. So one click of a button, they could talk to their therapist.
Yeah.
That's again need of the hour. Many people they can't afford therapy, or they can't afford a counselor. That's what I see. Many people avoid counseling or therapies
Yeah.
because they can't afford the number of hours and finding the right person or probably the right mentor.
Mhm.
Thank you, Rosanna, for sharing that. Thank you for sharing your journey. I know definitely this could go on for a couple of hours
Yeah.
because there's a lot to talk. So we could have a series of shows on being indigenous healers. Probably we can talk about healing and empowerment in the future shows as well. Um, but again, for all the listeners out there who would catch up the social media bites, and if you are listening to this on Google Podcast Replay or Apple Podcast, I would request you to send in your feedback or leave your comments. And I'll send you all the recordings, Rosanna. I'll send you
No,
all the
thank you
links
so
on
much.
another email. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
being
Raj.
here with us. And we will talk soon, and I'll connect with you. We'll look for collaboration or partnership again, creating
Yeah.
more awareness on all the aspects which you're working on. And also as an upcoming author, that's something which is which
Yes.
we will speak about probably
Yes, I
by the
am.
time you launch your book. I don't know, is it going to be finished by the end of this quarter, or do we have
Oh
a
no,
deadline
not
on
yet.
the book?
Not yet. I
Okay.
think I'm trying to concentrate because I do a lot of writing with the doctoral program. I do want to concentrate on finishing the doctoral program and then
Okay.
finishing my book at this point. So it wouldn't be necessarily
By
in
the
this
end
time.
of 2021. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let's hope so. But
Mhm.
again, I'll stay in touch with you, and thank you for being another influential person within the community in mental health space. Again, it's an honor for us, you sharing your story and being here with us. Thank you so much, Rosaana,
Thank you,
and
Raj.
I'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you for
Bye
the
bye.
invitation and thank you for having me here as well.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Rosaana. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you all.